staying here. Okay, 6:30. I'd like to call the board workshop at 6:30 to order. And the first thing I'd like to do is if we would all stand for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you. Okay, our presentation will be on enrollment and staffing. And with that being said, I'll turn this over to Mr. Smith.
All right, I'm going to switch seats. Okay, so thank you. This is the first time that I believe we've done a presentation like this. And as that, I would say a huge amount of thanks go to Ms. Baldelli and Mrs. Silverman and Mr. Giovanone, as we really started this last spring. And it's taken a huge amount of work to get to where we are today. Again, this is the first time, so this hopefully will start a conversation. And then as we go through this, we'll get better and we'll start to understand what kinds of questions you ask, and we can adjust this presentation. The goal is to do this on an annual basis. As a school district, we hire people. That's what we do, and we put them in positions to work with children. And so this is an accounting of the largest part of the budget. It's the largest part of the work we do, and it's to hopefully give you a base as to what we have and where we're going. These numbers change frequently. Enrollment and staffing change pretty much daily, and so for the purpose of this presentation, the state of Connecticut uses October 1st as the official snapshot, and so all these numbers reflect October 1st enrollment and staffing. This is a huge chart. I give it to you as backup. This came from the November 14 Malone and McBroom projections, but the next slide really is the same information, just boiled down to something that's a little more tangible. The dotted line is the projected enrollment over time, and the solid line is the actual enrollment over time. So you can see the high school enrollment pretty much tracks projections, as does Sarah Noble, and as does Scotticoke. The elementary projected a spike this year, and that was part of what we went through last year when we did budget, and we added some kindergarten teachers, and that spike didn't come. Our enrollment, though, has trended pretty close to projection. That being said, the first 5 years of projections are usually pretty accurate because you have a 5-year, they call it a regression analysis. We know the birth rates 5 years ago, and those students project forward into kindergarten. The further you get out in those projections, and if I go back a slide here, when you start getting to 1920, 2021, those out years, the projections become less accurate, especially at the K-3 level. And so you'll see as we go out, the trend data and whether or not that's accurate, time will tell. But so far, to date, our projections have been extremely accurate. Then we'll go to elementary enrollment and staffing. We'll start with Hill and Plain. The goal here is to push through and then go back and give you time to ask questions. But if you have anything, please feel free to ask. So K2 enrollment, you'll see this is last year's. Average class size, enrollment, number of sections, at K-1-2, and then this year. You'll see that that kindergarten is, we expected an increase in enrollment that never came. So we were really 33 students less than last year in kindergarten at Hill and Plain. And second grade, we did expect that drop to happen, and then you'll see the staffing change of -1 at Hill and Plain in second grade. At Northville, the anticipated increase also did not come in kindergarten, but we did add a teacher because we were concerned about class size last budget season. So you'll see the +1 in staffing changes. And then the other two grades, although we did get more students, we kept the staffing levels consistent and class size adjusted accordingly. Again, these are as of October 1st of this year. When you get to Sarah Noble has been trending down, as that second slide showed, over the last couple of years, and we've been adjusting staffing numbers at the same interval that we've been adjusting the student enrollment piece. And so we lost 6 students in third grade. We took a teacher out of there, and that adjusted accordingly the average class size. And then we took 2 out of fourth grade, dropping from 16 teachers down to 14 teachers. And class size went up about 1 student per class. And then in fifth grade, we also took 1 student, 1 staffing, and student enrollment stayed pretty flat there. So overall, in grades 3, 4, 5, in classroom teachers only, we took 4 teachers out of that budget to budget, and you'll see student enrollment drop 26. Overall, K-5, again, this is classroom teachers only. We had a net change of 52 students down K-5, and that equivalent in staffing was 4 reductions. And so you can see the number of staff. Total, we have 83 classroom teachers, K-5. When you go to the next slide, these are all the non-classroom teachers. So art, music, library, PE, and special education, broken out by school and by year. You'll see that last June at Sarah Noble, we cut 3 additional staffing. And that's 1 art, 1 music, and 1 PE teacher. So those are referenced in that staffing change as well. I know that you hear from time to time, and I certainly have, that we've reduced student enrollment, and we don't ever take staffing. Well, on these past 2 slides, that's 7 staff members year to year that we've reduced K-5, and 52 students fewer year to year. So this page, and I can tell you that there's a lot of heavy lifting done by the finance department and the human resource department. This slide and making sure all of this ties out to what we actually have, and making sure they're allocated by building is a large amount of work and a tribute to those departments. But this is as accurate as we can be with the allocation of every staff member, certified staff member in those buildings. So you have our instructional coaches and allocated by building, our art teachers, the bilingual teacher, general ed, our administration, everything's here as far as certified staff. And then this is kind of everybody else. This is all non-certified staff, our paras, tutors, secretaries. I would note that in the secretary line there, secretaries include anybody in the secretarial bargaining unit. So those are your library media clerks, your computer technicians. They're both in the secretarial bargaining unit. So in that line of secretaries, there's more than just what some people kind of picture when they walk into a school and the secretary is behind the desk there. This is everybody in that school that's in that bargaining unit. And you can see, our paraeducator and our tutor numbers have stayed the same year to year in almost every case. And the food service piece, they're really not FTEs because they all work different hours, and that's where, those are the number of people in those schools, but it's not an FTE in the same way that, a nurse or a secretary is there the whole school day. So now, we'll kind of move to 612. 612, I'm going to kind of reverse, where in elementary we started with each individual and built up. We're going to do the reverse at the secondary level, because the secondary level has its own complexities. So this slide here starts with all certified staff, 612 in the district. You'll see Scotticoke in the high school, year to year, and split by everything from the administration through all of the teaching positions at both of those schools. There's a few kind of complexities in that the mathematic interventionist is a part-time person who's in the math department. And so that we'll get to those nuances if you need to, but this is a pretty good snapshot of all staffing, 612. And then this is the non-certified, same concept as the K-5, food service, maintenance and custodial, nurses, secretaries, again, secretaries include library clerks and computer technicians, tutors, paraprofessionals, those are all in those groups. When you get to enrollment and staffing at the secondary level and 612 being the secondary level, class size is calculated slightly different because unlike an elementary classroom where you have the same students all day, students move throughout. But if you look at this, sixth grade, for example, has 2 language arts teachers on each team. There are 3 teams. And so that's where you see 6 ELA teachers in grade 6 and only 3 at grade 7. In grade 7, we introduce world language. So in 6th grade, they have 2 periods of language arts. In 7th grade, that moves, and 8th grade, that moves to 1 period of language arts and 1 period of a foreign language. And so each team consists of about 5 teachers, if you count the world language, even though they're not associated with a team. Teamed students, 1 period of those 5 periods are in a language. And so when you look at the number of sections each teacher teaches, and then the average class size range, you get in there. I will point out, like in music, for example, that 1. So we have instrumental music classes at Sarah Noble and at the middle school. From time to time, you have students in with certain instruments. There might only be a couple, and then this again is the October 1st, somewhere in September, 1 or 2 students decide, oh, I'm in 7th grade now, I'm no longer going to play the clarinet, and so I'm not going to, I'm going to drop my instrumental, and then that number will be readjusted second semester when they do the second semester schedule and reassess to see which sectionals they need. We do try to avoid sections of 1 and 2, but sometimes those things are unavoidable. That's the music. Was there another one I was going to address there? So we can come back with questions, but that's the 1. When you get to the high school, you have similar things that happen. And so here are all the departments in the high school, the number of sections offered, the number of teachers in that department, the average class size, and then what I give you again is the range, because the range tells a lot. There isn't one answer to this range. Some of these small class sizes might be a special education class. Some of those classes, I can tell you some of them, for example, in 16, 17 in science, for example, there's a 3. That was a AP Physics 2, when that was the first year that was split. So there was a few students, I think there were 4 that registered, 1 dropped, they ran the class with 3. In year 2, that physics class, now that students knew it was there, grew into 9 students. And so it fluctuates year to year and from semester to semester. And some of those are small. For example, there's an AutoCAD class that ran with 6 students. And when you get into a comprehensive high school and the scheduling of classes, you have to weigh student choice and the availability of staff members and the number of course sections. So in some cases, there's multiple sections that students can choose from, and in other cases, the demand isn't high, and you have to decide whether or not to run the class. And so that's an ongoing conversation, and one that we can have at the board level as well, to provide some guidance to the schools as to when we decide to run a class. If a student drops a class over the summer and it had 5 students in it, do you tell the other 4 students that we're not running it? If it's an AP Physics 2 class, for example, or an AP French class, and you only have 4 or 5 students, do you tell seniors who have taken French for 3 years or 6 years, 5 years, I guess, 2 years at Scotticoke and 3 at the high school, that in their senior year, you're not going to offer that class? Those are conversations that the high school guidance department and the high school administration has on a regular basis. And then some of those other classes are a special education math class, for example, is one of them, or an intro science class for special needs students. And then here is the district staffing. So this is all district employees that aren't tied to a specific building. So in here you have central office positions, you have positions like the BCBA that we added last year, that's the behaviorist that travels to all the schools in the district and goes kind of where the need is. There isn't a school that that person is assigned to. It's really a case-by-case situation. People like our systems analyst that deals with back-end computer positions. On this page, you also see Litchfield Hills. That's the position for, that's the school for 18 to 21-year-old special needs students that we run out of the max. And then you'll also see Faith Academy. We have almost 1 staff member, 0.7 staffing at Faith Academy. And that's mandated by state statute. And here you have a complete summary of all the staff in the district broken down by, for the most part, bargaining unit or non-bargaining unit. So you have administrators. There are 17 administrators in the administrators bargaining unit, and then you have myself and Mr. Corpo, as that's how you get to 19. And then the rest are pretty self-explanatory. The tutors are there. Non-bargaining unit really includes a lot of the positions on this previous slide. And that's the list that we talk about usually in this year in January and in June. And so when I say that we have a total of 617.29 staff members, that's mostly accurate. And I put a little note on the bottom that we get into the difference between a staff member and an employee. So if you would define an employee as anybody who gets a paycheck from the school district, there are additional employees not included in that 617. For example, our athletic coaches, some of them are not employees already, and they only coach 1 season. They get a paycheck from us. Clubs and activities, adult education staff, and some of our substitutes, our long-term subs, are employees of the district, but they do not show up in any of the kind of official staffing numbers. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. Again, this is a lot of data. It's a lot of information. This is information that changes frequently, and yet we want to have the opportunity before budget for you to have, this is not connected to budgeting at all. But we want to start with a baseline accounting.
Page 14,
Page 14.
the high school.
Yep.
Are we going to be able to see a list of each class, the number of sections, and the number of students in each section?
Yes, we can do that. We were concerned tonight on how deep to go, how fast. Again, first time that we're doing this kind of a presentation, so we want those questions. And we can do that, like I would say, by semester.
That's fine. Please.
Is that something that you want to, should we do that at a subcommittee meeting? Do you want to do that in a
Well, I
board
believe I
meeting?
requested it before. This isn't the first time, and I thought that's what we were getting tonight, was specifically that, because I think that is integral for budget. I mean, if we're going to add new classes at the high school, I think we need to know what we have, what's working, and what's not. And I know I've requested that previously a couple different times, and I have to say I'm really disappointed that that's not what we got tonight, because that's fully what I was expecting.
So we do have that. That is the information that was used to build this. again, first time out, to put all of that here. And in 40 minutes, we want to be cautious of time, and I didn't want to run out of time tonight, but we have that. And we
Okay.
can certainly distribute that to you.
That would be super helpful.
Again, I think those are the kinds of pieces that we want to be able to have a conversation over, because much like,
Well, I think we have to have the information to be
information
able
to
to
have
ask
the
questions.
conversation.
Before we can start the conversation, we have to have the
Sure,
information,
we
so.
can do that.
I would agree with that, because to get to have that information prior to the discussion is helpful for us to look, for me, to
Absolutely.
look at the numbers, to look at the range here. It prompts a tremendous amount of conversation, but I agree, I need that backup. That'd be great.
You can do that.
And I want to say, I appreciate the work that's gone into this.
Yep.
Clearly, it's a large amount of work, and I
Yes.
don't discount that whatsoever. But I was hoping to get that other, especially since the budget is literally
Sure.
right on our heels.
Yeah, we can have that for you.
Thanks. Again, yeah, having been on the other side of this, I know how much work these are, so I appreciate that. And to be able to give this kind of resolution, I think this is helpful, and this is a good balcony view for us. Josh, you had mentioned, when we take a look at, let's say, the high school enrollment, student choice, availability, staffing, right? Just playing out the timeline, the sequence for how students are choosing some of these courses, and also where our budget cycle lies. I get the sense that our budget cycle is well ahead of where student choice would be for, let's say, the following year. Now, in the elementaries, I've got to imagine that, we carry second graders go to third grade and third graders go to fourth grade. And so instructionally, there's a pretty clear path there. My question would be for the high school, maybe even for Scotticoke, where there's some elective offerings, and there's some student choice there. How is that working right now to be able to identify that let's say we're trying to meet student need, but at the same time, we're trying to balance that with a budget that has already been built?
Right, and that is, and I know Mr. Shrew's here too, and can layer in some additional detail, but that is a huge issue. I think certain things, freshman and sophomore courses, how many math sections we need, those are things that we can project. When you get to junior and seniors and electives, much harder to do. Course selection for students usually starts in late January, early February. And so by the time that process is finished, you're talking, March, and then you get into building a schedule, and you get into conflict. And that conflict piece, if you want to take, and that's where kind of those singletons, and I'll use kind of the AP French and AP Physics 2, for example. If you want both of those classes, well, there might only be 3 students that really take both of those classes. Maybe only be 1 student that really needs both of those classes. And so, scheduling around students, trying to find a way to how many teachers, how many sections. You're not going to offer, if you have 3 students that both need those classes, you can't offer 3 sections of that. And so if you only offer 1 section of it, what else is there? And does that student also want a pottery class? And now they can't take AP French, Physics 2, and a pottery class because there's a conflict. And so then you go back to the student and say, can't take these together. Can you move it? What else is available? And again, when you get into some of those classes, and I think Mr. Shagru, weigh in if you need to, but I think that's the challenge of some of these courses. And when you see kind of that 5 or the 4, do you say to 4 students, you know what, 2 students who are going to take this class aren't going to take it, and so we're going to cancel the whole class? And you say to those 4 students, we're going to run this class. And some of that gets up to, you have a science teacher that's certified in physics. Do you have a sophomore physics class that's really full, and you can open up another section and alleviate that? Or is that teacher going to be doing a study hall? We would tell you that if it's a difference between a teacher monitoring a study hall and teaching 5 students AP Physics 2, we'd rather that teacher teaching Physics 2. Study halls don't require any specialty, don't require any certification, and anybody can cover that. If you get into these, AP French, you have a student that in their senior year, you're faced with offering a class with 4 students, and a teacher who's not teaching, not in the study hall, or hall duty or something else, we want to match that up as often as possible. But that literally goes through the summer. I mean, there was 2 years ago, I think it was one of those the AP Physics 2 classes, where we were talking to 4 parents in the summertime, and those parents were saying, please don't cancel this class. My student wants to take this class. And we went back and forth of, is that the best use of community resources? What's the teacher going to teach otherwise? And so, kind of in a best-case scenario, we would have January and we'd schedule out, but that kind of has a long tail, and plays out long-term.
To that point, can I follow up?
Sure.
Okay. How many, again, if you're leading with student choice, let's say, which most schools do, right? It's not a novel thing. How many of, let's say, even those 3 or 7 or 9 kids who received the class, did get the class, what was the course request? So, are we even meeting that? Are we having singletons and doubletons in the schedule itself that eliminate some of that student choice as well? So let's say you had 12 kids, but you can only find seats to get 9 of those kids in there. How much of that are we not capturing some students just based on the, having a singleton?
I have to defer a little bit to that piece.
So that becomes a challenge when you have the singletons, as you know.
Sure.
So, and it seems that unfortunately, you're talking AP Physics to BC Calculus, AP Calc, some of the higher end courses, and even some of our maybe advanced art classes. When you start getting those singletons, we try and we use the computer to do everything in our power to make sure we're not putting the AP Calc and the AP Physics in the same period where a kid has to make a choice. So we're trying to use our 8 blocks over 2 days to systematically put them strategically so a kid can get as many of them as possibly can. Unfortunately, and invariably it seems to be that there are some choices that need to be made, whether it's a Spanish 4 and a calc class or a Spanish 4 and a science class. It's not a perfect science for that.
And there's some courses, I'm thinking like some of our CAD programs, the journalism, where there's a hard cap too, that you can't put 17 kids in woodshop, or maybe you put 17, but not 20. There are hard caps on some of those courses. So if you have not enough to open another section, but those you start maxing those out, that's another challenge too, and they run up against each other.
Right, some of those electives that we run into those problems, whether it's like child development,
Yep.
Or CAD is an example when there's only so many machines, those types of things. We have some challenges with that, spatial issues as well.
But then that would be more sections probably likely if we staff it.
Well, like child development's tough,
Right,
you can't really open up more sections of that one, and so that is, and actually one of the 3s in here is the health. So child development, for example, has a student intern that kind of co-teaches the class. And so even though it's a section of 3, it's not like a class of 2 or 3 students with a teacher. That student is an intern in the child development class. But to get credit for it, they have to have a section and a course number. And there's only a couple of students enrolled because the teacher can only have 1 or 2 interns each semester working in the class with them. So again, sometimes that course and section that we'll send out to you there's nuances to it that that we'll have to, ask questions on and answer and highlight. Tammy, can you pass that to Bill, please?
I got a question first, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm detecting that, there's some concerns with the low enrollment numbers in some of the sections. And are there any that are offered, any electives that are offered every other year?
So we have a couple.
So we get, or every other
We used
semester?
to do that. One that comes to mind would be AP Chem. We did that every other year.
Right. Well, when we're talking, 3 or 4 students, I was just throwing this out there
Right.
that perhaps, every other. I mean, you can't extend the school day.
Right.
We know that. But every other year and building it in with that in mind.
That's a great suggestion. The only problem that we run into in some of the higher level ones, like Josh said, is the AP Physics 2, or like a higher level mathematics course, whether it be a BC Calc. Usually those students are seniors though, because they've matriculated through and now all of a sudden they're at the highest point for their senior year. So running it every other year wouldn't help that.
What about super seniors?
Yeah, or have them come back.
Yes,
I don't think they'd like that, but yeah.
They could defer their entry to Yale so they could finish.
Yeah.
Angie?
Kind of in the same conversation here. So some of those classes with the low enrollment, I think there's alternatives that we don't often pursue. I think we can do online courses, I think we can do independent studies. I'm sure those come with a budgetary consequence. So I guess I would like to know what that budgetary consequence is. If we have 2 students with the AP French that need the class to, you know, do whatever for college, and we have a student or a teacher that's willing to say, okay, I'll do an independent study with them, what is that budgetary consequence? Because I'm sure there is one.
Sure.
And then kind of the flip side of that, you know, if it's an AP class, those students clearly are capable of learning on their own. But can an AP class be like an independent study, or can that be an online course? Through, I know that you use a lot of the Brigham Young
Yeah,
University courses. So are those options? Because oftentimes I have parents come to me in this particular instance and say, well, you know, there were 3 kids, they had to cancel it. And I tell them always, go back and talk to your counselor about online, or, you know, do, and invariably the counselor's like, well, we can't do that why not? I mean, is there something I'm not understanding, you know, and if so, could you enlighten us on what that is?
So I guess I can't speak for all courses, but for many of the courses, we do have online options. The BYU, I think, mostly are credit recovery, although some of them, not all of them. And then Johns Hopkins has some, depending on the math level you get to. There's other colleges that you can take 4 credit courses at and transfer them into high school. We always have students transferring, especially students who run into scheduling conflicts, are able to, some of them do it over the summer and transfer. We do have a limit on how many credits students can transfer in, and the independent study is also an option, especially before, I think 2 years ago, we started offering the BC Calc
We did.
as an as a
did.
reoccurring course.
Last year. It was.
Last year was the first year we did that?
Yeah, it was an independent study last year.
Yeah, and so when we have only a few students, we do, and we've worked, I think last year they worked with the department chair.
Yes.
As an independent study. So those options are available. Not everybody wants to take those options. I would say the language teachers are really good, especially the high-end language. When you get to like German 4, French 4, there may not be a lot, and so they'll teach a dual class. So if you're taking AP language, you can come the same meeting period as the section of German 3 students, and the teacher, actually I think German, we have at least one section where it's probably 2, 3, and 4 in the same room at the same time, and the teacher is differentiating between those groups. And so, again, when possible, we do that, but that isn't always possible. And so that's where some of these, you know, this isn't something that we plan to do, but sometimes you run into that kind of, okay, we have 4, 6, that is a conversation we have with the board. And Mr. Segru and I talk a lot, because if the alternative is the teacher's in a study hall or the teacher's doing hall duty, I would say that's not a good use of our resources to have a highly trained, skilled teacher doing hall duty and 4 kids in a study hall, or doing an independent study. The other side, though, is if you have a teacher who, instead of being in a study hall or hall duty, can be opening up a class that was large, and we can take a class of 27 and make it a class of 17, you know, that may be a better use of resources than having that teacher teach a class of 5 or 6.
Right.
So, you know, like I said, that conversation begins really now, I would say, you know, as we look to what our needs are for next year, and it continues, in some cases, through August, you know, and whether or not we're going to run a section, or whether or not we have to open up another section. You know, there's, and I didn't put in here, actually, you could probably calculate it, the total number of sections, when you look at all those sections that we offer, and some of them are 1 semester, some are 2 semester, you know, there's a lot of permutations, and that's the challenge. I mean, the high school spends a lot of time on that schedule, and so I think it would be helpful for us to have more conversation with the board as to how do you help us make that decision of how do you allocate scarce resources. You know, is there, I would recommend that we don't come up with a hard number. I've been in places where they said, you know, no class less than 9. And so if a kid drops it in August, moves out of town, and that 9 goes to an 8, do you run the course, or do you tell those 8 students, sorry? So, I mean, I think those hard lines in the sand are difficult, but to have some maybe guiding criteria, some questions that we should ask, and maybe some alternate paths that we want to recommend to parents should something, you know, evaporate when they're planning on taking it. Those are good conversations for us to have.
But, you know, and I mean, my goal is not to micromanage how many kids are in a class. That's up to you guys. My goal is to say, okay, we have 16 sections of woodshop, do we need 18? Do we need another class? I mean, that, my goal in getting this information is to best serve the students and make sure that students aren't sitting in 2 study halls a day, or students aren't taking, underwater basket weaving because that was the only other class. So that's my goal. What do you need? I mean, do we need to allocate teachers to the high school? Do we need to allocate resources there? And, I trust that you'll use those resources as best you can. So that's my goal in doing this, not to say, oh, you've got 2 students here, why do you only have 2 students? I don't care about that. That's, if you can tell me that's the best use, then fine. But I want to make sure we're serving the needs of our students
Yeah.
and not sticking them somewhere just because that's where they fit.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking these questions, is there's no other ulterior motive behind them, so.
I picked a great seat, didn't I? I was just going to inquire about a extra assignment with a stipend. Do we have any of those? Do we incorporate that tool?
We do. And I would say the most frequent place that occurs are in shortage areas. We did it 2 years ago in French at the middle school.
Well, I think that's another,
We added,
because of the tight schedule. I mean, I shouldn't say tight schedule, awkward, complicated schedule.
Yeah.
That would be another way to look at opening up, more options, because you could,
I would say it happens for 2 reasons. One, when we have kind of an awkward situation,
Bless you.
and we need to accommodate students. Again, depending a little, it's hard to do it with like wood shop, or when it's room dependent, like the pottery class, those are tough ones. And then the other piece would be, when you have a .2, we have too many students in our math classes. I can't justify hiring a whole nother math teacher, but we need one more section of algebra taught. Then we use kind of that overage piece.
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it is dependent on our staff willing to do it,
understand
but high school
it's
staff is
dependent, but-
usually pretty good about picking up an extra class. And then, that's usually 1/5 basically of their salary, which is more economical than hiring a whole other teacher.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Shifting gears a little bit, so the elementary enrollment, 4, 5, 6, are those actual numbers?
Are you on
Slide 4, 5, and 6?
slides 4, 5, and 6? Yes, they're active, actual numbers as of October 1st.
Okay, and the enrollment change is actual, not against the projected?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. When you see the 16-17 enrollment, those are actual October 1st enrollment numbers,
Okay,
not the projection.
okay. Thank you.
Wendy?
Yeah, please. Actually, the last page, the staffing summary. Do we have a staffing summary for 2016?
Interesting.
And
Would be in the budget.
Well, so it's
Well,
interesting, the
not-
budget is so this
It's
is
not.
where the
Right.
nuance will come, because if you look in the budget book, not all of
That's
these
right.
positions are funded through the operating budget. And so there's some positions in here, like the Sarah Noble interventionist that you see on here, that's funded through title money.
can we get that, 2,000, or is that too, is
So,
that
like-
cumbersome to do that?
No,
I
think
don't want it,
the-
I'm not looking to create a ton of work. I was just wondering if we had that.
So for example, like on slide 15,
Mm-hmm.
basically, I think the information is probably in this presentation.
If you pull it together. Yep, and I can do that, that's
Well,
fine.
we could do that for you
No,
too. I mean, to
Well, I
layer
think
in
it'd
a
be helpful
separate
for
column.
everybody.
Yeah, we'll do that for you.
Could I
Yeah,
follow
we
up with
can
a
do that.
question on that, on the staffing summary? Those are, perhaps I'm missing, I realize food service is not in a budget, they're not in here, are they? Are they here, or,
So food
it's not in the
service,
staffing summary, is it?
they are in each of the schools.
Right,
so-
but they're not listed in the overall staffing summary,
That's correct.
correct? Because I see the notation at the bottom and it's not mentioned, but they are technically employees of the board.
They are technically employees of the board, that's right. So like on the pre-K 5, they're on that slide. So I guess that's interesting. So when we put the roll-up here, they're not in NBU because
They're not.
they are bargaining.
They are a bargaining unit, we have 7 bargaining units and they're not listed.
That's correct. So
Okay.
we could add them to this slide.
Great.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's good. I like doing this as a group. Let's see. Food service.
let Josh get the
Go ahead.
Good?
Josh, one question here. I noticed Scotticoke has PLTW kind of broken out
Yes.
in the number of sections, and I'm under the assumption on page 14 that science probably has the number of sections. It's rare you see anything compete with English, right, for the number of sections.
That is true.
So I'm just curious if there's an opportunity for us to get kind of a breakout, right, of how much of that is PLTW, and is that just living in science right now? Has tech ed taken on any of that?
Right now, that still lives only in science.
Okay,
And when we give you the course and section,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see how many sections. I was just looking at this today, too. I want to say there are 2 or 3, was it either we were talking about it? Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot. But I want to say there's 2, I'll give you the breakdown. There's
Yeah.
2 or 3 sections, not the design and the development, the senior kind of capstone class, and there's
Right.
only 1 section of that.
Right.
The other ones, I want to say there's 2 sections with an average class size of about 16 in each one. But I'll send you that. That's in that course breakdown, but all PDP, Project Lead the Way, is in science. That
Okay.
85 sections.
right.
Okay.
Because for Scotticoke there, it's listed out with 33 sections there,
Right, so in Scotticoke, unlike the high school,
it
where
lives.
credit,
Got it.
we don't give credits at the middle school level.
Right,
Right.
You know, so at the high school level, in order for a student to get credit for a course, it has to be in a department
Yeah.
and taught by a teacher that's certified in that area.
right,
It's a little different at the middle school where kind of high school credits aren't captured the same way. And so that's where Project Lead the Way can stand as an independent kind of course section
Department,
category,
right.
where in the high school, it has to be in a credit-bearing area.
Good. One other question? Get in there?
Is it a follow-up?
Nope.
Tammy,
There you go.
go ahead, Tammy.
I just have a really quick question. It gives us a really good idea of where we're going, both in enrollment and if the staffing is matching that. But not every slide has a total. Do you think that that could be done? Because otherwise,
Sure.
we're trying to add in our head, and which I can do until we start getting to certain fractions. I'm gonna
Right.
pull out my calculator. I'm not
I
JT.
can tell you, before we came up here tonight, I went through.
Most of
Anthony was
them
I think
do,
it was
but
this
it's
slide,
towards the
maybe.
end, there's just some that don't, and
Yep.
then you have to kind of look, 'cause
Right.
it just for a cursory view, it's good to
Yeah,
see
we can do
where
that.
we're matching up and where
I was
we're
doing that as
reducing
we went
here.
along. Yeah, I gotcha.
Add totals.
JT?
Oh, so I see the breakout, again, 612 special ed, 13.25, 13.6. Sorry, page 11.
Thank you.
So for special education, that's the FTE, right? I'm just curious how that staffing is being utilized and, you know, that capacity. How is that being used with regard to the sections that we have here?
So with some exception, you won't capture that. So for example, some of the, maybe a math class or like a study skills class
Right.
would have a special ed teacher kind of as the teacher of record assigned to that course and section. But the majority of those special ed teachers, I'm going to just look to Mr. Sugar to confirm but the majority of those special ed teachers are, shouldn't say that, like the behavior intervention program has a teacher allocated to it.
Okay,
But I would still say that the majority of those special ed teachers are not, they may be co-teaching, they may be assigned case manager work, but they're not all assigned a course section. I'm looking at Mrs. Olson and Mr. Shahir, but.
The vast majority of them are co-teaching
Yeah,
Oh.
in
So
the
you-
content areas.
so you wouldn't see kind of an allocation of special ed tied to a
Right.
course or section independently. Really, it may not be captured in the report that we're going to give you with course and section. It won't be captured in that because they're co-teaching, they're not necessarily kind of the quote teacher of record.
Right.
for
and some of those are
courses.
likely IEP driven too.
Absolutely.
You know, so
Absolutely.
that's kind of outside of, let's say, necessarily a schedule, student choice.
So most of them probably co-teach 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 classes and then have a caseload on top of that.
Okay.
With the exception of like the behavior intervention teachers, that would be a little different. Our BIP room, there's 2 of those at the high school.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, Brian and Angie.
Yeah, maybe it's just me. I've been going back to page 2 and 3 with enrollment within projections. What do they base, how are they projecting 2025?
Yeah, so, I spent a little time in demographic world, maybe a decade ago now, and I would not pretend to explain all of the mathematical algorithms. I can tell you the first years, they really look at birth rates, and they look at housing markets, they look at kind of how people move, how the housing sales, trends, and they project out how many of those born 5 years ago will show up in our schools in kindergarten through like this regression analysis that they do. And then they kind of play that forward, again, based on the migratory patterns of a town. They project that forward for 20 years or so. And again, the first 5 are the most accurate, the second 5 are less accurate. And so when we look at this chart and we're hitting, approaching year 5, we're having the internal conversation, it may be time to have this study done again and have them look at birth rates 5 years ago and start to project those forward.
Just really interesting, and how accurate.
It is scary accurate.
This is the second report that's been done to the town. We had, the first one was the Chung report that was commissioned by the town. They paid for that prior to this report. And that also had a pretty scary
So
accuracy.
Dr. Chung's analysis is the one I'm most familiar with, and he's about 99% accurate once you get beyond kindergarten. Kindergarten is the hardest one to project, especially in communities that have, like, we don't have a lot of transition here. Once a family enters in kindergarten, we graduate a large percentage of our kindergartners from high school 12 years later. Other towns have a much greater migratory pattern, and that's a little harder to do. But for the most part, we can tell you how many students from kindergarten are going to graduate from New Milford High School 12 years later. And that, we're a good town for these kinds of studies because there's not a ton of transition. And that's where when you get into kind of this slide here, once you get beyond K2, we're pretty specific in that pattern. So it's, Dr. Chung lectures at Fordham, I believe, and could spend a lot of hours explaining to you how he does it. But it's impressive. Yeah, they do a good job.
That's fascinating.
Back on page 11,
Sure.
under art, it says includes career ed. Do you elaborate on that just a little bit? What does that mean?
Page 11. Oh, yes, the paste and copy class.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
there you go. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Ms. Waldell.
That makes sense.
And that's kind of to JT's question before. There are courses at the high school that you're kind of like, well, why is that associated with that department? And it really comes down to the certification of the teachers teaching it and the type of credit that students get in those courses. And a lot of those electives, this is a conversation we have with the State Department all the time, a lot of those electives kind of get into these blurry areas. Is it in art? Is it science? Project Lead the Way, some districts have in tech ed, some districts have in science. It really comes down to the type of credit and the type of teacher teaching it. So again, you'll see that when we give you that breakdown. Some things you'll be like, well, why is this in here? And it comes down to that certification, which to Mr. Lawson's question before also makes things complicated when you have a teacher pick up an extra section. I can't have a science teacher pick up a tech ed class, even if they're the Project Lead the Way person and they can teach computer-aided design. It's a tech ed course, and I can't have a science teacher pick that up. And that's where you get to kind of the state's lack of flexibility in the certification and course section kinds of conversation. A lot of this comes from a report we give called the Teacher Course Section Report, and once a year, Mrs. Baldelli's office and Ms. Pratt's office do a nice job aligning every single teacher we have, every certification, every course they teach, every section they teach, and the number of students in it, and that gets reported to the State Department, who now, to the credit of our state, is able to tie that back to certification and give us a report if we have anybody teaching a course or a section that isn't in line with their certification, to which, by the way, we don't.
Okay,
My last question. 10?
wanted to make sure we gave you time for questions, so I
Don't give me like
appreciate it.
that.
Oh, yeah, I'm recognizing you. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair. One interesting number here, even going back to page 2, thanks Andrew for getting us back there. There's a really interesting little bump in there, the 8th to 9th grade, which I have a feeling that we probably know what was going on there. I'm just curious, for that Sherman population that joins us in 9th grade, let's say at the high school.
Yep.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but what is our current cohort, the Sherman cohort, how large is that right now at
I
high school?
believe 9-12, we have 99 students. I'll look, Anthony can probably look up how many freshmen come in.
That sounds historically about what
But usually we
it's
get
been.
about 20 freshmen a year,
About.
and they stay with us for 4 years.
Right, and they've got options too, but.
They do have
Right,
options. They
right.
have New Fairfield and Region 12, as well as Nonawag and Abatech.
Right, so it's interesting, so Malone McBroom is, they're actually trying to capture that as well, through
They
that,
are.
through their projections. So it's just an interesting number there, so.
Because we also have, the high school actually has a decent number of students who've been homeschooled, K-8, that come to high school, or they go to Faith Academy or some other private school for kind of K-8, but they want to be at a comprehensive high school. They want athletics, they want the music program, they want to be on track for a college entry from a kind of accredited high school.
Thanks. Thank you, David Wilson.
Okay, I was just gonna wrap it up. We have several questions, okay?
Have them here.
Okay, that we can expect. Anybody else other than JT?
Or GT.
All right, now, if you do have questions, please direct them to the superintendent's office, okay? And, you know, because if you're like me, you'll be driving home and say, I should have asked that. This is not the end of questions for this. If you have any more, please just direct them to the superintendent's office, and we'll see what we can do with that.
Good, thank you very much. This was the start of a dialogue, so I appreciate the questions and the time.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. 10 minutes for your next meeting.
Time.
I just have 2 days.